Okay, so today's topic is all around crisis management. So what I'm going to talk to you about, and there will be information that will follow this in terms of if you don't know where to start with crisis management, here's a little toolkit, here's something to help you to kind of start that thinking in your own organization, is give you the tools and frameworks that are going to help you and your organizations think about how you can respond, how you can make sure you've got coordination in place, and what you need to be thinking about around crisis management processes. And the reason that I thought this would be a good topic for us to talk about is that we know that disruptions are happening all the time, and disruptions are literally a way of how we live nowadays, and organizations can't or don't always have the time to spend on having perfect preparation in place. So they need to be able to respond quickly, make sure that they've got the right structures in place as necessary. And that's where crisis management to me comes into play, because a lot of this is almost the starting point for any resilience that you would put into your organization. Is, do we know who the right people are to come together when the disruption happens to help us to understand the situation, understand what impact it's having on our organization and what we need to do from there. So even if you're, not even thinking about business continuity or the wider topics of resilience, this is a really good thing to be starting to put in place for your own organization. So what I'm going to talk about is thinking about how you could structure your crisis response. What are the key components of that kind of practical approach, and a toolkit that we will share after this. How you can think about building that capability across your team, and then how you might go about embedding and testing your crisis readiness. And a lot of this, again, and for those of you who've been through my sessions before, to me, a lot of this comes to how do you build the right mindset and culture within the organization, so that people are very clear on what's expected of them. And there are some very actionable steps that you can take when the disruption happens. So when I think about crisis management and when I'm talking to organizations about what this is, again, it comes back to a lot about mindset and culture, because I think it's more about, do people know what to do? Are people confident in dealing with whatever uncertainty they are being faced? Do they know who to communicate with? Who's going to lead the different parts of the response? And have they kind of got that confidence to deal with some of the uncertainty that crisis events bring up? What we know is that often when crises occur, we don't have all the facts. So there is an element of being able to act at that point and have confidence in acting at that point when you don't have all the information to hand, when you don't know what it's going to look like in an hour or 2 hours time. And some of the toolkit that I will share with you after this kind of gives some ideas about how you can build that for your own organization. And again, a lot of this to me isn't complicated. It's not spending a lot of money. It's not necessarily buying loads of tools that you might need. It's about those simple steps that can help an organization be prepared and build that capability within your organization. So I've touched on this already a few times, but one of the things you will get following today is what we've created within Resilience Continuity is a crisis management toolkit. And this is to help organizations partly assess where you're at. What have you got in place for your organization? What does your crisis management arrangements look like? Have you thought through when you're going to activate? Have you thought through some of the communications elements? Because again, that is a key part of being able to manage in a crisis, is having that clear communications. And again, if anyone joined the session earlier this year that one of my colleagues gave around crisis communications, we know that's a really important part of this process. Having holding statements in place, having internal comms statements in place. One of the things that I'm hearing more and more, again, with people I'm talking to, is that crisis communications is something that they aren't thinking about until the disruption happens. And I've had the same conversation with at least 3 or 4 different people in the last 2 weeks, where it was, oh, we're a bit worried about how long it'll take for statements to be signed off when we have a disruption. A lot of this you can pre-prepare, and you should be pre-preparing it. So again, the toolkit you get will give you some examples of what those statements should look like. But one of the things I'd always encourage anyone to do if you're in this area of your organization is to come back and think, okay, actually, how much of this can we plan now? Again, a lot of what we do is about planning ahead, and how much of it will we need to adjust at the time of a disruption. So starting with, again, what you'll find in this template and this toolkit is what I want you to think about. So firstly, there is a that readiness self-assessment. So it's an opportunity for you to, for your organization, go, okay, how good are we right now? How good is our crisis plan? What have we got in place? And part of this will ask you to assess your organization's preparedness, and looking at this from different parts of your organization, whether it is your crisis communications, your roles and responsibilities. Have you got activation criteria in place? Have you got documented plans that are available outside of your own network? All of those very simple things. Giving yourself an opportunity to reflect on that and identify where do you think maybe there are gaps in your planning, and where you might have some challenges when you deal with a disruption. So the first thing I wanted to do was kind of give organizations the opportunity to do that self-reflection. Where do we think we are right now? And then part of that will then help you to identify some of those low effort, high impact actions. So the next part of the checklist comes into, okay, a prioritization matrix. Because again, what you might find is there are lots of different areas that you might have gaps, which can get quite overwhelming. So let's think about what are the really key things that we can do right now, maybe in the next few hours or the next few days, the next few weeks, that really help prepare your organization. And it's simple things, again, like coming back to those holding statements. They're really easy to do that and actually spend the time now with the right leaders, with the right decision makers, getting those holding statements drafted and signed off. Particularly when you're talking about technical things such as cyber or operational disruptions, we know that we don't necessarily know what the disruption is going to be, but we can come up with something that actually is a starter for 10 that we can adjust when that needs to be, when the event happens. And that can be signed off by the right people. So you're not having to go through that whole sign-off process when time is short and pressure is very high. The other kind of things that might be quick wins, if you haven't got this already in place, is who are going to be the decision makers for your organization? And have they got backups already identified? Do those backups know what's expected of them? Do those backups know that they are a backup? And have they been involved in any of the training and exercising that you're doing in your organization? Another good thing to do is also to have physical copies of plans and any contact cards. So cyber obviously is the big disruption that most organizations are concerned with right now. And that, if that was a reality, if that happened to your organization, you may not have your Teams environment. You may not have your Microsoft Exchange, which probably means you might not have any contact details. Do you have contact information in your phones that you can use outside of your own network? Because one of the things I know, and again, this was a conversation, I think actually Claire, you and I might have been having this yesterday about, how phones are set up. You can find out where your contacts are stored, certainly on iPhone. You can find out what's stored within an Office 365 environment, what's stored on my phone, what's stored elsewhere. And it's, again, a really simple step to make sure that for your key individuals, that you can contact them, that you have their contact information outside of any of your systems, so that you're not reliant on a system that may not be available at that time. It's also worth, and we'll talk about crisis logs in a bit more in a moment, but thinking about actually how you're going to capture information, how are you going to use your crisis log, and how are you going to make sure that those individuals that are tasked with documenting decisions, documenting the information out of a crisis, know what's expected of them, know what they should be recording, why they should be recording it, and all of those kind of things. And the last thing that might be, again, a quick win that you could implement is how would you communicate with people if you can't communicate by email or Office 365? Again, it comes back to having your contact information outside of your system, but then making sure that you can actually communicate with them in a clear and systematic way. So again, within the template and the toolkit that you will get following this, we have drafted some ideas for what your crisis log template would look like. So if you haven't thought this through, if you haven't got something for your organization, what is it you need to be capturing? What is it you need to be thinking about? What an internal comm statement might look like, what those holding statements might look like, and some ideas about how you might start to capture key contacts that you can either have available within a SharePoint environment or digitally within it, or whatever system you use, and or print them out so you've got them available if the systems are not around. The other thing, and again, those of you that have been in resilience for a long time will be familiar with this, the big question that often comes up is when to activate your plan. When does this become a crisis? What triggers it? And really the key advice I would always say to any organization is have some activation thresholds. It's important to have that within there, have some frameworks that people can use. But what you don't want individuals to do is wait till it's chaotic and it's the worst case, or it's got too big before they escalate. So you want people to be thinking about escalating early rather than waiting until they have all the facts and have all the information to hand. Because again, we know that there may not be enough facts. We may not have all the decisions we want. So you want people to be escalating early. You want people to be thinking about what are those triggers in terms of operational disruption, that safety, service, reputation, where does that kind of trigger it? And what we want to make sure is that people aren't waiting until it has got to a really worst case scenario before you're telling people, because at that point you've probably lost control of the situation. You've certainly lost control of some of the communications around this, and that doesn't look positive from an organizational perspective. Again, I've already touched on this, but it is important to come back to a toolkit is just a toolkit. Yes, it can help you to be prepared. Having a plan is an important part of preparing. But what you want people to do, and again, it comes back to when to activate, when to escalate, you want people to feel confident about being able to share information. You want people to be able to feel confident about challenging decisions, because that builds a more robust approach to crisis management. It helps people to challenge where maybe they're not clear on what's expected of them, and maybe they don't think that they know what their role is, or they don't think they should be escalating a situation. The more you do exercising, the more you talk about what you would do, the more you review disruptions that have happened to your organizations or other organizations that could be your sector or other sectors, will get you and the individuals in the organization thinking about what are the kind of events that maybe we want to be talking about. What are the kind of events that we would see would cause a crisis for us? And it starts to build that culture of learning, and it starts to build that culture of openness and transparency, which means that people will feel more confident about sharing their challenges and telling you when things aren't necessarily working as they expect. So I've talked a lot at you. I just wanted to get people's views, and I know for a lot of people in this organisation, this might not be in your gift to necessarily do anything, but is there anything that's resonated for you from what I've shared? Anything that you think, oh, actually, yeah, that's something that we as an organisation or me as a practitioner would like to spend some more time working on?
I think for me, definitely, all of the things you've said, knowing when to escalate, it's a big dilemma actually, because you're always thinking, obviously you don't want to wait until you lost control, as you clearly stated, but there's that period just before that you think you can manage it. And it's about internally knowing and giving maybe yourself some kind of, well, I'm just going to see how the next hour goes. And if there is no improvement, then I'm going to have to escalate. It's just setting that kind of target. That's something that I've learned over, well, especially over the last 12 months. But it's knowing exactly when to escalate, because you don't want to bring everything up to your senior leaders, just in case, there's that zone where it's like, do I wait now? Do I escalate?
Yeah. It's always back to the sky is falling, the sky is falling. We don't want to be the person that's always saying the sky is falling. But what we don't want to be is the person that waits till the sky has fallen before we go, oh yeah, the sky is falling. And it is a balance. And I do like a little bit of that. Sometimes a lot of this depends on your organization. So it depends on whether you feel there is an openness to talk about things and to escalate things sooner rather than later, or people would prefer you do manage and only escalate at the point at which it's really bad. But I think giving yourself some kind of a time frame is a really good way of kind of bounding that, because again, it gives you maybe a bit of time to understand the challenge before you do escalate, and get some more information which might help with some of those conversations going forward. Any other? Oh, Beverly.
Yeah, hi Helen. I like the fact that you talk about kind of the planning but exercising, and it's something that in recent years been trying to push more and more is not spending that time writing the plan, but planning, spending that time and communicating, just talking to your teams, talking to people, getting to know them from the ground up, not just the same people who will always know what to do, but they're never there. And we're seeing that time and time again in all the disasters, all the inquiries, is we're not getting deep enough into the organisation. So I always say to my students, go and have a cup of coffee, go and talk to people, ask them the what ifs, how would they deal with those kind of situations, will give them confidence, but will also help the network. And I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on a template, filling in a tick box approach, or filling in the plan. And I really do think that we are starting to see a little bit of a change, a paradigm shift in the teachings of crisis management, and saying, actually, working with people, understanding their pressures. We were only talking about it in academia today, understanding work pressures and our psychology and our short kind of time span and memory span. Now we really need to change things up a little bit. And I love the fact that you say about getting people little kind of cards and things like that. And I think also talking about the technology, I think you saying about the technology, but what if the technology is not there? We're looking at the future risks, we're looking at what's going to face us, perhaps not too much in the future, but actually planning without that technology there as well, and having it on the old paper and pen side of things. Bring back the laminators. I remember the day of the laminators, but we really have to be plan B now, and organizations really have to think about plan B. And what happens, we've got enough experience of that, case study of how that will affect your staff mentally, socially, and we need to have those things in place. So yeah, all power to what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think, again, coming back to where you started, a lot of this is just about talk about this. Let's just talk about this. Let's just share our ideas, share our thoughts on this, because nobody is doing this in isolation. We shouldn't be doing it. Nobody is facing, no one organization is like, oh, I've got all of these crises problems and they're all mine and nobody else has these. That's not the world we live in. So we're all facing the same crises. We're all facing the same challenges.
Yeah.
And I think it's both within your own organizations, but sharing this with other individuals is so important. It kind of makes me think back to a few years ago doing a presentation similar to, well, not like this, but I've often been the only person in an organization doing this. So you're kind of a bit of an isolationist and you're a bit on your own. Whereas, and it's really important to have these networks, because this is where you get that, oh, you know what, you're actually all right, because you are doing the right things. You're not the only one faced with these problems. And it's like that light bulb moment of, oh yeah, actually your problems are the same as my problems. You might be in a different organization, maybe a completely different organization, but you've still got the same problems. You've still got the same challenges, and you might have some different ways of approaching it. I think that's a huge advantage, just to talking about this, both in your own organization and outside of it. Definitely.
Breaking down the barriers. We've over the years we've put so many barriers in place, and we tried to put it for the right reasons, our kind of structures that we've put in place. And I'm hearing now more and more private and public sector going, these barriers are these structures are making barriers now to communication, and we're seeing the evidence of that. And actually that I mean, I can only relate to some of the experiences that I've had, but also relating that to learning the lessons from what we're seeing, is actually those barriers, those structures we're putting in place are the barriers. And often just having a conversation with perhaps some key people. I remember my facilities manager being one of the best people in the world to be best friends with, because he knew everybody in the organization, and was able to access things that perhaps other managers might have had a barrier to, because it's like, oh, that's a decision to be made, whereas he would just go, we've got to make the decision. But having that cup of coffee regularly with them, or having lunch with them, it wasn't a meeting, it was just having those networks and those meetings. And I've heard from even senior police officers, fire officers over the last couple of years now, who are saying some of the structures we've got in place are putting barriers into just having those conversations and building those networks. And we really, I've seen that, like you, Helen, we've gone into organizations, audited them, and it's just, you see, I've literally gone down corridors with people and get, put hands together and go, meet so-and-so, you work for the same organization. And it really, oh no, we've got to wait for a meeting, or haven't got round to doing that. And I just think that the communication is just the biggest thing for me. But thinking about the structures you put in place can be barriers as well. So I think we need to recognize that.
Yes, I think there's an element, and I think it's not popular probably, but we have to come in and kind of break things a little bit, because to exactly that point, silos are created because organizational structures exist, and you've got that within one organization, and then you've got the divide between the other organizations, and everyone has to work together. And it comes back to none of us are on an island in this world. We all should be working together, but we feel bounded often by whatever, like this construct that's put around us to say, oh, you can only talk to these people, or you can only talk within your own organization. Fine if you talk to each other, but don't talk to anyone else. Don't share those ideas. And I think that's, it's just such a challenge to what we do, because I think we do often come in with that different mindset of going, well, actually, wouldn't it be better if we all just talk to each other? That would be so much easier. I don't understand why you don't. Why are you challenging this? Or why are you sat in your office and not talking to each other? It makes no sense.
We don't understand ourselves as humans, do we? And we often don't put that into our planning, and understanding how we behave. And I mean, I look at my 14-year-old girl, I look at my 19-year-old girl, I look at some of my students and some of the organizations I've been in, and you're right, we put this kind of, not going to talk to you because you work for a contractor, or you work for that department, or I'm not talking to her today type thing, you know, as my teenage but we, as humans, we do that. We
Yeah.
do really have to you know, just make ourselves go into everybody's meetings and just sit there and listen and absorb and ask the what if questions and
Yeah.
what do you understand about that? And for me, some of that time is better spent than writing an exercise, you know, and don't get me wrong, I believe in exercises more than I perhaps do planning.
Yeah.
But actually, you know, that is an exercise in itself. And I think we forget that those barriers. So yeah.
I agree. It's the natural exercising, isn't it? Like you said, the what ifs and the conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Chill.
I'm helping out a non-for-profit in my region, and what they do, it's pro bono work. I'm helping them with operational resilience and business continuity plan. And basically they work to help, families either in food crisis or who are food insecure. A lot of what we rely on at the center is volunteer help who come in and out and rotate. Sometimes it's groups that come from a bank and who are just doing something to fill a check mark one day. So it's people like me who have been there, for several years. So the issue is though is that I'm concerned about as I'm developing this crisis management plan and operation resilience plan is that the volunteers don't know what initiates a crisis, or if they do initiate something, that they're not going to want to say anything because, hey, I'm just a volunteer. Or, just kind of like breaking past that barrier of, hey, who am I to say what's going on instead of pointing it out. And I mean, we really do depend on the volunteers to, to help us out. So I'm trying to figure out because they are transient, some are permanent, some are not permanent, but routine, some are transient, how we explain to them without they're getting nervous or, oh, well, then I don't want to do this anymore if I'm responsible for that. How we kind of push past that and say, hey, you know what, sometimes bad things happen. Here's the escalation chain of what you need to know. But I'm concerned that that is not going to work. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think I was where I started, but then I kind of changed my thoughts as you went through that. Was the question I had first was, do they not feel part of the organization because they're volunteers? Is that
right?
Is that
yeah, because the people who actually work there are very tight knit. They're very tight knit, and they have to be because their job is so serious. Especially, I don't know if y'all have heard in the news about the SNAP benefits that we've had. That was really a challenge. We managed it. It's good. Things look like they're going to move forward. Yay. But in those kinds of situations, that's what really binds the working staff together. The volunteers that show up there, like I said, some of them are just there for a day. The other ones, yes, before I started doing the pro bono work for them, because I said, hey, do y'all need help with this? You're certainly on the outside of it. And I didn't necessarily know who to say, oh, listen, these people keep sending us all this rotten produce. I mean, somebody's going to get E. coli or food poisoning, and so, I mean, I knew to tell somebody that certainly, but a lot of people I don't think would. And that's my concern.
Yeah.
So how do you get the volunteers are just there as a one-off, or I mean, honestly, some people are doing the volunteer work for to meet a requirement for a misdemeanor or something like that because they got in trouble. So yeah, or volunteer, kids from high schools, volunteer for their little check of the box to put on their college resume.
Yes. Yes, you've got people there for very different reasons, haven't you? That's another part of it. Is one, they're volunteers and they don't necessarily see a role in the organization, but two, the reason they're volunteering isn't necessarily altruistic.
Right. I can't be bothered. That's your problem because I'm leaving in an hour.
Yes, exactly.
Come back.
Yes, and so they're not even wouldn't be interested in supporting on the how do we protect the organization piece. They'd be just, it's like, this is my job and I need to just do it for the sake of it.
Well, especially if they're there for community service, they're not going to want to fess up, oops, and then get in trouble all over again. So, or think that they're going to get in trouble all over again.
I'm just trying to think. I don't know if you've got any thoughts, Bev.
It's a hard one, but I mean, it's no different to community resilience, societal resilience, what we're trying to do. And also when you open up an evacuation centre, when you've got the officials and the volunteers as such, you know, and it's the bureaucracy that meets the the bureaucracy barriers, and I think I go back to the kind of humanity side of us again, and when we do our training is understanding with the officialdom of it is how we come across, and actually we kind of need that kind of understanding of we should be a little bit more open and understand that we put a barrier by being that bureaucratic approach, whatever we are, and it's kind of the first part of the brief should be come and tell me. You know, open up to the leadership role and just go, come and tell me, you know, because you can't, I mean, the best relationships I've had is with actually just outside of work, but inside of work, having those going to meet people, having those coffees, having lunch with people, you know, and just getting to know one another. Then you kind of trust one another, but you can't do that with your kind of volunteers. But by encouraging through training, being open rather than that kind of, no, I've got to fill in my form, you know, we're going to follow this process and listen, those listening skills, we kind of miss some of that, I think, in our training, and we forget to put that even in our briefings, in the sheet of paper, going, right, yes, you're there to be coordinator, but you've got to be open to, and listen, else you're going to have gaps, you're going to miss those things. So yeah, that's the only thing I can think of. That
yeah, no, I think that's where kind of my head had gone a little bit, because I think you're right. It's understanding that those individuals are there for a very specific reason, but giving them the space to talk, to share, and giving them, you're not asking them more than they will want to give necessarily, but it's just part and parcel of how they operate. There is an open conversation. So certainly, I guess back to that, people feeling like if you highlight something, it's going to cause them more trouble. That's a little bit of, there's a little bit of why they're there in the first place, but there's also a little bit of them feeling the organization has made them feel to some extent that this is you're highlighting a problem rather than trying to help.
I go to what I'm researching for my PhD, which is ethics in emergency management, and you know, speaking up, the kind of turn your eye to kind of moral blindness, as it's called in research. But I wonder if the basics, some things that we did years ago but we've forgotten because of technology, is that kind of just that board where people can put up a post-it note or write, this is a problem. They're not seen and it's anonymous, you know, and so any student, anybody who's doing can just write, look, here's a board, you're not going to get to me because we're going to be busy, but if there's a problem, put it on the board and we can see it. You don't have to kind of be seen as doing that. And maybe some of those kind of old-fashioned basic ways of doing it maybe some of the solutions.
I think that's a really good idea. I do think that's a great idea, actually.
We do have a whiteboard up there, and rarely is it written on, so there you go. And by the way, Beverly, I'm all about laminating things and sticking them in the wallet.
All about the lamination. Everyone's coming back to lamination. So making a comeback. Okay. I'm conscious that we're at time, but thank you everyone for participating today. Really, really good conversations, and really appreciate you just being part of the discussion. I've put the QR code in for the next session, which is in December. As I said, that's going to be all around supply chain resilience. And you will get a copy of this recording and the toolkit that we've created following today's session. So thank you everybody for participating. Any last questions?
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. Catch you all soon.
Have
a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.